Welcome everybody, bienvenue tout le monde, to the third session of the OHASSTA Institute. We are so excited to welcome everybody to today's topic, which is challenging conversations about politics, les conversations provocantes au sujet de la politique. So I'm Valerie Laniu. I'm from the Chatham-Kent region. I teach for CSA Prévidence.
Oui.
And my co-host.
Oui, moi c'est Valérie Aymon, donc deux Valérie ce soir. J'enseigne à Ottawa pour le Conseil des écoles catholiques du centre Est. I'm happy to be here tonight. Alors, on va prendre quelques minutes pour faire un petit land acknowledgement. Alors, ma reconnaissance du territoire, étant ici dans la magnifique ville d'Ottawa, nous aimerions reconnaître que la terre partagée sur laquelle nous nous rassemblons est le territoire traditionnel non cédé des Algonquins, ainsi que des Kanien'kehá:ka, les Mohawks, et d'un historique d'une communauté métisse. Un long historique de communauté métisse. De plus, nous soulignons qu'Ottawa est une terre d'accueil pour les Inuits hors région et que cette communauté grandissante contribue à la beauté et richesse de la capitale nationale. Nous montrons notre respect pour les contributions de ces peuples autochtones et reconnaissons le rôle des traités dans ce qui est maintenant l'Ontario. Personnellement, je suis très reconnaissante à tous les jours de parcourir cette belle ville de verdure et de rivières dans laquelle j'habite depuis plus de 20 ans.
We invite everybody now, if they would like to share any kind of land acknowledgement from where they are in Ontario or elsewhere, to share that in the chat. My land acknowledgement is for Chatham-Kent. So the land that is known as Chatham-Kent today was established as part of Treaty Number 2, the McKee Purchase Treaty of 1790. At that time, the land was also inhabited by the Three Fires Confederacy, the Odawa, the Potawatomi, and the Ojibwe. The Lenape also lived in the area at the time, stewarding the land. The people of the Three Fire Confederacy, also known as the Anishinaabe, the Lenape, people agreed to the mutual sharing of the land with obligations and responsibilities to the environment. Today, Chatham-Kent neighbors the Lenape, the Yulo-Pui, the Lakiwits, which is part of the McKee Purchase Treaty, as well as the unceded territory of the Beatrice Island First Nation. Chatham-Kent continues to be home to diverse First Nations, Métis, and Inuit peoples. As beneficiaries of the treaty, we recognize all peoples have responsibilities, including collective responsibilities to the land and the water, which I'm right in the Great Lakes region, so we have access to beautiful lakes all around. So just to begin, for any new people, to begin, for anybody who is new, who doesn't really know much about OHASTA, we are the Ontario History and Social Science Teachers Association. We are a volunteer organization composed of teachers in high school and elementary. We've been serving members since 1978, and we would like to also thank the OTF, which is the Ontario Teachers Federation, for the use of the Zoom platform to allow us to do this institute today. If you have any kind of questions, you can put them in the chat about OHASTA. We are available on OHASTA or on X, formerly known as Twitter, or you can visit our website. So we would like to thank our generous sponsors who are listed below. So mostly teaching unions. So we have OSSTF, we have IRFO, we have the Windsor-Essex Catholic District School Board, Elections Canada, SANC, as well as CIVIX, which two of our panelists come from today, and I'm sorry, the Samara Centre for Democracy. If you would like to participate, do not forget to unmute yourself. And if you feel comfortable enough to show your video, And you can also share in the chat as we have somebody who will be moderating that as well. To just go over, since we will be discussing politics, which is kind of a hot button issue to be discussing in today's current climate, I just want to remind everybody of the norms. So balance, safety, and challenging thinking. So just remember to keep an open mind, and even if you are not necessarily agreeing, to kind of like challenge your own ways of thinking. So équilibrer sécurité et inconfort. Parfois être inconfortable, c'est comme c'est une bonne chose pour comme vraiment avoir des nouveaux pensées, des nouvelles idées. I think in one of the previous sessions, we talked about how it's kind of important to have an open mind, and it is okay to change your mind. So we're hoping to kind of have open discussions, engage with challenging ideas, being humble, recognizing your social position. I think that's also very important when you're talking about politics, because different issues affect people very differently, depending on socioeconomic status, race, and a bunch of other factors. So that's very important to recognize that as well, and to be present and engaged in active listening, and to give everybody their turn to speak.
Sival. Alors, comme à chaque session, like every session so far, we've started with an icebreaker activity, une petite activité qui peut être facilement réalisée dans la salle de classe. Encore une fois, on utilise Jamboard. Obviously, you can use a picture and have it on either the whiteboard. You can have it on flip chart paper. You can have like one picture per table if you have groups 3 or 4. You guys know how to use pictures because we're talking about political topics, les actions politiques, les enjeux politiques. So I started off with this picture that maybe you will recognize or not, but the idea is to trigger conversation, susciter la conversation chez nos élèves. Alors, une image peut souvent susciter beaucoup de conversations. Alors, dans les Jamboard, you have 3 questions, and I'm going to divide the group into 3 groups. So this is how it's going to go. If your birthday is from December to April, you're going to answer question number 1. So on the first board, if your birthday is from May to August, you're going to go question number 2. And if your birthday is September to December, you're going to answer question number 3. And so pay attention to the question. Those are just suggestions. Obviously, you can frame the question based on your class and what you're hoping to get from the students. So we can take a couple of minutes to do that. Rendez-vous dans le Jamboard. Les questions sont traduites dans les 2 langues. Alors, soyez très à l'aise de répondre dans la langue que vous préférez, en français ou en anglais. Et puis, c'est selon votre mois de naissance qui détermine la question à laquelle vous allez répondre. Alors, prenons quelques minutes pour le faire. Oh, interesting. Have means to be there, financial or employer.
Yeah, I was
Very
just looking at
interesting.
that one as well.
Very
I guess
interesting.
it goes back to the norm of recognizing your privilege a little bit.
Yeah. And getting the students to come up with those similarities sometimes can be a good starting point for a class discussion if it's a hot topic, depending on the pictures that you bring up, obviously.
Yeah, I really like also the answer, both groups are players in a larger social dilemma, and then the person poses another question, which is great, which is
Awesome.
what is the role of the state and what is the role of a citizen? So that's definitely the kind of conversations you want to be able to generate.
For sure. You have the 3rd page?
Oh, working versus not working.
Versus not working.
Disrupting peace for democratic reasons.
Shouting versus not shouting. Yep. Awesome. And actually, I was going to also just send that out, but you could have another board and where it's, what are your questions about this picture? Because we often tend to ask the questions as teachers, but students also have very good questions. So Demander aux élèves quelles sont leurs questions par rapport à cette image pourrait vraiment être un bon point de départ et puis, encore une fois, susciter les conversations, puis aller générer des belles idées en salle de classe. Donc, avoir un tableau où les élèves sont invités à poser leurs questions pourrait être aussi une autre alternative. Est-ce qu'on y va avec nos questions, nos panélistes? Fantastique.
Oui.
Donc, ce soir, oui. Donc, ce soir, on a encore 4 panélistes qui vont venir répondre à nos questions englobantes au niveau de la politique. Alors, on commence avec Rachel, qui était ici la dernière fois. Alors, Rachel Collishaw est une... oh, là, j'ai perdu ma petite présentation. Donc, est une enseignante qui est très engagée, qui travaille beaucoup dans le développement professionnel. Ses ressources pédagogiques sont concentrées sur les concepts de la pensée historique et l'apprentissage par enquête. Elle a reçu le prix du gouverneur général en histoire pour l'excellence en enseignement en 2013. Rebienvenue, Rachel. On est très content de t'avoir avec nous ce soir.
Okay. Our next panelist is Beatrice Wayne. She is a researcher, teacher, and advocate for democracy. She has a PhD in history from NYU and a master's from UPenn. She's taught at institutions, or she's taught courses for youth activism at Harvard, University of Sydney, and NYU. She has received grants for research across North America and Ethiopia. Beyond academia, she's contributed to nonprofits and educational publishers like Students Learn, Students Vote, and Scholastic Books. Beatrice has also co-founded Student Vote Research Network and often provides commentary on democratic engagement for various various media outlets. So hello, Beatrice, welcome.
Notre prochaine panéliste est Madame Dena Cotnareanu. Et je ne l'ai pas vue, j'espère qu'elle est là avec nous ce soir. Donc, en tant que directrice de la programmation... Oh, excellent! Bienvenue. En tant que directrice de la programmation française de CIVIX, Dana contribue aux divers programmes de l'organisation qui aident à développer les compétences et les habitudes d'une citoyenneté active et informée chez les jeunes. Au cours des 5 dernières années, elle s'est concentrée sur la maîtrise de l'information numérique ainsi que sur les ressources qui aident les éducateurs à introduire des discussions politiques dans les salles de classe. Merci d'être ici avec nous ce soir.
And our final panelist is Ken Boyd from CIVIX as well. He is, sorry, let me open my notes. He's the director of education at CIVIX, where he researches and develops experimental learning programs on the themes of digital media literacy and constructive discussions. He also delivers training at workshops on civics programming and has worked with teachers, students, parents, and other educational stakeholders from across Canada. Welcome, Ken.
Donc, comme par les autres sessions que nous avons eues, on va commencer par poser nos questions englobantes. Chacun des panélistes va pouvoir y répondre. We may ask the question in French first or in English first, so we want to alternate between both languages. Alors, commençons avec notre première question sans plus tarder. Je vais lancer cette discussion ce soir avec la question: est-ce que la politique canadienne encourage la polarisation des idées? Alors, voici notre première question. Et puis, j'invite soit Rachel ou Dana à se prononcer avec cette première question.
Ah oui, absolument, je peux commencer. Bonsoir tout le monde et je suis ici en tant que ma capacité de conseillère en pédagogie chez Élections Canada. Alors, c'est mon job de tous les jours. Je suis plus dans la salle de classe. And I wanted to say that, so this question, I think, I don't know if I'm the best person to answer this particular question, but we have done some research and some reading in developing our programs at Elections Canada around polarization. And in particular, one book is quite important to our work, which is The Political Classroom by Paula Hess and McAvoy. And it's a fantastic, fantastic book that I would recommend to every teacher here. Maybe a summer read, it's kind of long. But one of the things that they mention in their introduction is that there have been they're looking at US history. But they're looking at when there's periods of polarization throughout history, what they noticed and what the research says is that in periods of polarization, engagement, so voter participation and other democratic participation actually increases. So a period of polarization, obviously it has all the negative effects that we think about in terms of polarization, but it can also provide us an opportunity to engage our students because they're coming into our classrooms more engaged. And I think getting them talking about politics at that time of political polarization, I think is really important. So it doesn't really answer the question, but I thought it was a helpful kick us off.
Merci. Dana, est-ce que tu veux reprendre la parole avec cette question sur la polarisation des idées?
Oui, c'est sûr. Merci, Rachel, d'avoir mis la table. J'avoue que c'est spécialement difficile de répondre à cette question. Je trouve le mot encourage assez fort. Je ne sais pas si la politique canadienne encourage la polarisation. C'est sûr que on remarque la polarisation de plus en plus. Et c'est pas juste qu'on le remarque, mais on le voit dans les études aussi, que les gens se sentent de plus en plus éloignés de l'un de l'autre, surtout de ceux avec qui ils ne sont pas d'accord. Donc, oui, il y a cette tendance au Canada, on la voit. Mais après, je sais pas si la question se réfère à notre politique ou au fonctionnement des partis politiques qui fait en sorte que c'est le cas. Il y a plusieurs facteurs qui font en sorte que nous sommes de plus en plus, nous sentons de plus en plus éloignés. En fait, on va peut-être en reparler, mais en fait, au Canada, selon les études, on n'est pas vraiment divisé sur les enjeux comme d'autres peuvent l'être aux États-Unis ou peut-être en Europe. Mais on se déteste de plus en plus. Donc, on n'est pas, c'est ça, on n'est pas, on a assez de consensus sur les enjeux, les grands enjeux, mais on voit quand même les personnes avec qui on n'est pas d'accord ou peut-être qui supportent un parti politique qu'on n'aime pas comme étant plus nos amis ou bon, on sent un écart. Donc, je vais m'arrêter là parce que peut-être mon collègue va avoir plus à dire là-dessus.
Would Ken or Samara would like to respond to that one? Not Samara, Beatrice. Sorry.
No, that's fine. Our
Sorry.
senior-
It's because of your name tag at the beginning.
I'm happy to jump in now, and I think what I have to say aligns with what Dana was saying to some extent, in that first of all, I would say broadly from the Samara Centre, from the perspective of our organization that studies, we do a project called the MP Exit Interview Project, where we've interviewed MPs, 160 from 2008 till now, doing exit interviews, where we ask them after they've finished serving in office what they thought about the process of serving in the House of Function, in the House of Commons, and how that how they were able to function as representatives of their communities on Parliament and be really honest about it, since they're no longer trying to stick to talking points. They're not trying to be elected. They can speak very candidly, and they have affirmed that they feel that the way that politics is practiced often does encourage polarization, often does encourage division. It's something that they find frustrating. They would like more opportunities to work collaboratively, to work between parties to create and find win-win solutions, rather than this approach to politics as if it's zero-sum between party leadership. So that is a concern that comes from MPs themselves, and we also know from research that this is a concern for young people in particular. So the Public Policy Forum did a report and found that amongst young people, a fear of growing polarization is the top concern. It eclipses concerns about climate change, about worsening economic situation, around another catastrophic health event like COVID-19. So this is a concern around young people. It's a concern around politicians. And I think one thing I would say is that I think what's really growing and fostered is a sense of effective polarization. So not necessarily ideological polarization. I don't think people are increasingly removed on that. If you actually dig into policy and what people care about, I don't think these conversations are increasingly challenging, but I think the sense that people are farther and farther removed, that it's harder and harder to have conversations, and that there is great divides between parties, between regions, between people of different backgrounds is growing. And I think that's fostered partially by a political system that doesn't create a lot of space for deliberation rather than debate, that doesn't create a lot of opportunities for civic discussion. And I'm interested, as we keep talking, sort of think about our political systems and our classrooms, and how maybe our political systems could work to be a little bit more like our classrooms and create space for genuine civic dialogue that is looking to not heckle, not have debate, but to have deliberation.
So I'm going to move on to the next question. So I invite Ken or Beatrice to kind of start us off here. So what strategies can be implemented to make political conversations more appealing and engaging for students given today's climate?
Maybe I'll start us off, just to give Beatrice a little bit of a break. Yeah, I think that the political climate right now is a hard one to enter if you're a young person. I think that the perspective or the perception, which is not incorrect, is that politics is often very combative, is very focused on debate, is focused on sort of bettering your opponents, really, and that's how they're often perceived, as political rivals are seen as opponents to be defeated. I think that one thing that, well, a few things that we can do is to try to make these conversations more appealing by really just actually making them conversations, right? Making them discussions and not just making them fights, right? So just one of the things that, one of the programs that CIVIX has developed is our PoliTalks program. This is something where we try to actively encourage classrooms that treat political issues as issues that are to be discussed, in the sense of trying to gain understanding about different issues and why people might see things differently, as opposed to trying to win. So trying to sort of change the focus of how politics are often presented. And one of the things, and also just picking up on something that Rachel said in the last question, which is to not really shy away from political discussions in classrooms. Rachel mentioned the great book, The Political Classroom, and one of the things that the researchers of the writers of that book found was that political classrooms where students could feel open to have discussions about political and social issues, these classrooms are ones where students were more engaged, more interested, more likely to listen to people who had different opinions from them. So I think, part of making political conversations more appealing is just inviting them to happen in the first place, even if that's something that might seem daunting at first.
Should I jump in now?
Yeah.
I would just agree with all of those aspects. And I think part of it is also not thinking about political conversations as something that is very separate or distinct from other conversations happening in the classroom. I think sometimes when we think about, oh, this is going to be political, it has to be, we think of something very dry and we think of something intimidating, and we don't necessarily connect it to issues that students already come in caring about, come in talking about, come up bringing into the classroom. And I think all of the issues that students care about are political, and we can approach them in that way. So sort of meeting students where they are in the political and focusing on the political issues that they care about is one strategy for making it appealing to them. And I also think framing it very much like Ken said is as thinking out loud in the classroom about these issues, and thinking about like co-creating spaces where you can have a really robust civic dialogue. One thing that is I've always found to be, so how do we define, and I think asking students that, how are we defining political, I think is a really great question. I think thinking through like a specific issue and talking about how it's approached in your community, but also how it's approached through policy, what levels of policy are addressing the issue in a way that students might make a meaningful change for students, and how students might approach enacting meaningful change on an issue if they wanted to. I think that's a political discussion, but it's not necessarily talking about, party politics. It's talking about it in an accessible way. And one more strategy I would say, and I'll hand it off, is just wherever the opportunity you have to bring students into the setting of the framework of the discussion, to setting norms, to discussing with students what is appropriate conversation, what would make them feel comfortable sharing their perspectives and viewpoints, and working with students to co-create guidelines around them, invites them into the conversation, and I think makes it you and them feel safer in approaching this discussion, because you've all together created this set of guidelines, so you know what the expectations are, and you feel invested in it, and they feel invested in it. So that's one idea to take forward.
I might pick that up then. Yeah, thanks for setting that up. It's great. Get the kids involved in the things that they're already talking about, and don't keep it separate. So it reminded me of this project I worked on with a group of teachers in my school board through a grant through OTF, where we were looking at civics and how to introduce it. And we asked the kids, just talk about something that makes you mad. And so kids gave us all these different answers. So, I don't like winter because it's cold. I don't like vegetables. And but also I don't like walking to school in the snow. So, which of these is actually a civic issue, and how do we sort them out? So probably I don't like vegetables. That's not really a civic issue. That's a personal preference. But walking to school in the snow is a civic issue, because it's about your municipal services and how that connects. So that's just a really simple way to engage students. But I would say that starting with where they are, and our approach at elections through our resources, we tend to take case studies. So we often like looking to the past to help engage students. So we have a resource called Civic Action Then and Now, where we ask students to think about that same question. What would you like to change in your school or your community? And what could you do to change it? Then students look through we have two different case studies available, one about how women got the right to vote in Manitoba, and then what I like to call the Constitution Train, which was Indigenous action in 1981 that led to the inclusion of Section 35 in the Constitution. And people took all kinds of action. So we have students, they use cards and they sort out the actions into different categories. So taking personal action, working together as a group, building public support, and ultimately taking it to the legislature or the decision makers. And so they sort all these things out that people did in the past, so they understand that civic actions are very complex. It's not just about the passage of a bill to law, but it's also about what are people doing in their communities to provide support for that idea. And then at the end, we ask them to really think about how does this, think about that thing that you thought about at the beginning, and maybe you just wrote down one word petition, but a petition can work in all of these different ways. It ultimately has to go to the legislature to make change. So what can you do now in your community? And one of the ways that I think is really important when we're engaging in political conversations is to move into that space of empowering kids, because it can be they're already overwhelmed, right? Like in the classroom, we have this great opportunity to support them and to make them feel, that they have agency, because they do. And there's lots of different ways that they can get involved. So that's my answer.
Excellent. Il faut avoir ces conversations dans la salle de classe. They have to be part of our routine, of our thinking routine, of our discussion routine. Thank you, thank you. Merci. Très intéressant. La prochaine question que nous allons discuter: comment pouvons-nous responsabiliser les élèves à être plus impliqués dans des causes politiques et exprimer leurs opinions sur les enjeux auxquels ils s'intéressent. On va un petit peu reprendre ce que Rachel vient de dire à propos de leur donner la parole, comment les engager dans ces enjeux, qu'est-ce qui les rend, qu'est-ce qui les fâche. Et peut-être je vais lancer la parole à Dana pour commencer.
Oui, merci. Bon, pour les responsabiliser ou aussi pour les encourager à participer dans leur communauté. Disons, je crois que la solution, une des solutions en tout cas, c'est en classe, c'est de faire des programmes ou des projets expérientiels, donc dans lesquels les élèves se pratiquent et ne font pas juste apprendre des informations, que ce soit par cœur ou non, mais se pratiquent réellement. Donc, ça peut passer par des élections parallèles comme nous on fait à CIVIX, donc ils vont voter pour les vrais candidats dans leur circonscription. Ou ça peut être autre chose, ça pourrait être un projet pour l'école dans lequel ils s'impliquent ou pour leur communauté. Bref, quelque chose où ils mettent la main à la pâte et s'investissent vraiment, ils travaillent ensemble vraiment, et donc qu'ils apprennent en le faisant finalement. Je pense que c'est une des solutions au moins pour leur, premièrement pour leur donner le goût, puis deuxièmement pour leur donner cette habitude à faire quelque chose. Voter, par exemple, ça devient une habitude à force de le faire. Faire du bénévolat aussi, ça peut devenir une habitude, donc un peu comme ça.
Et créer cette bonne habitude d'aller voter. Fantastique, merci. Je lance la parole. Beatrice, you want to get involved in this one?
Sure, yes. I think, first of all, I agree with Dana very much that experiential learning is just one of the richest and best ways to get students involved and feel empowered by their learning. I think that's so important. One point I would just make is another way to approach this is to recognize their existing political activism and advocacy. I think often we sort of buy into the myth that students are apathetic. Not you, I know teachers are aware that that's not the case, but I think there's a cultural perception. And I think acknowledging and understanding the advocacy and the civic engagement that they are active in, particularly online, understanding that they're producing and absorbing unprecedented levels of political content now than 10 years ago. And this is particularly online, or spaces where youth are really, really civically engaged. So understanding outside of voting, there's all these ways in which our students are really politically active in ways, if we have a very narrow definition of politics, we might not identify, but they care about issues, they're posting about issues, they're creating content about issues. And if we can find ways of bringing that into the classroom, if we can have activities that have an element of social media and potentially information literacy, digital literacy, and helping students identify misinformation. I know CIVIX can talk with a lot of authority about that, bringing that into the classroom. Media Smarts also has great resources for that. The Samara Centre has a field guide to digital online conversation. But I think I'll stop at just acknowledging and finding places where students are already politically engaged and supporting them in that is one strategy.
I might jump in. I haven't weighed in on this one yet. Okay, so and I agree. I think one of the things that comes up when we're out in classrooms working with teachers is teachers often bring up, well, do you think the voting age should be lowered? And of course, as an employee of Elections Canada, I have no opinions whatsoever on how we should change our electoral systems. But I usually throw it back to the kids and say, what do you think? What are the reasons for and against? And it usually, I don't know if this has changed, you can let me know, but it in my experience has been about 50-50. Like, kids are very opposed or very for this change. And I think the kids that have the kind of like, no, look at us, like, have you seen us? We're not ready. Like, they have this idea that they don't understand, they don't know how to vote, or they don't know how to make that decision. And I say to them, look, it's not like you wave a magic wand when you turn 18 and suddenly all the the issues and you understand how to cast your ballot, like you actually have to practice. And so that's where like the student vote program is such a great experiential piece to really engage in that. But the more we can prepare them as future voters and citizens now, then the better off they all are. But I do think that having, like, to get back to the questions, like how do we empower them? I think, you know, we've already said it, let's have those conversations in the classroom, let's make space for them, but don't just have them, like value them and make them a central part of the learning, and assess them. So Valerie Amo and I used to teach together at the same school, and our principal used to say, you know, that the people doing the work are the people doing the learning. So if the work is engaging in political conversations, then the students need to be doing that. And related to that, one of the things that Hess and McAvoy found by looking at all these different case studies of classrooms, and they're like best practice discussion classrooms, when they interviewed the kids 10 years later or 20 years later, I can't remember, sometime later, you know, the kids that were in those classrooms where they were actually deliberating and having those conversations, they didn't talk about the teacher. They didn't say, Mr. So-and-so was so nice. They said, we talked about this, we engaged in these issues. And I think that orientation to having, you know, what are the kids talking about, and removing yourself, kind of gives you like, you know, like you're not going to put yourself in hot water as a teacher, but also the focus is on supporting the kids as they try to understand what they believe, and they're having those structured conversations that we've been talking about in all of these institute sessions. And just one more, like if they're not going to do it in the classroom, where are they going to do it? That's my last point.
Okay, I'm going to move on to the very last question. So how can we cultivate a perspective that humanizes public servants and politicians, allowing students to see the individuals behind the roles? And I'm going to start with Ken with that one.
Sure. Yeah. I think there's the most straightforward answer to that, I think, is to have students talk to public servants and politicians. If you want to see the human behind the position, you sort of have to get to know the human, talk to them at least in some capacity. We have a program called Rep Day, where we invite MPs into the classroom to talk to students in their local areas. Just for that purpose, right? That's one of the main purposes there, is to really just sort of connect people with the members of government that are representing them, and for them to get to know them better. I know that we've heard from politicians that have come to our events and been on our panels before, and been having discussions, that it's not easy to be a politician in this current climate. They receive a lot of sort of vitriol and hate online, especially. I think the Samara Centre has a lot of research that they've done about that. And so we do see that there is that kind of concern right there, which is this kind of that dehumanization might take place, at least in some form, especially for politicians who are women or members of visible minorities. But I think, yeah, one thing is actually getting sort of that contact between the younger people, the government, to let them understand that these are actually human beings out there, people that they can, and also people that they can actually talk with, and that they can actually connect with. This is not necessarily easy to do, I don't think. I mean, our program is something that I think it allows a lot of students to connect to people, but also it has to be sort of a two-way street with politicians being willing to talk to and connect with the young people that are that they're sort of in their jurisdiction as they're riding as well. But I think I think my most straightforward answer to how do we help humanize public servants and politicians is talk to each other.
I'd like to jump in, just because it's a real passion of the Samara Centre. The whole concept behind the podcast we made, Humans of the House, was exactly that. It was that we can better understand the way our political system works, and also better connect to it if we understand the lived experience of MPs. So we created a 6-episode podcast that features the voices of 12 different MPs who talk about their experience after they've left the House of Commons. And I think really students need to hear humans who have served in these roles talking openly and candidly and even emotionally about their experiences, so they can connect to the process of federal government. And I think that's true for anything. I think as much as we can ground these political conversations in the lived experiences of people involved in them, whether that's grassroots activists, public servants, elected officials, or people who are experiencing policy, I think that that's the richest way we can really engage students in this conversation and keep it very human focused and non-combative. And I really would like to plug the great teaching resources that Sank helped and Rachel and Val were involved in creating for our podcast. So we have Humans of the House. We also have a French language podcast, Les Personnages de la Chambre. And both of those have wonderful teaching resources that you can use to bring that sort of human side of politics into your classroom. I'll link them here.
Perfect. I'm gonna be adding all of the resources that the panelists are sharing as well to our Padlet, which have all of the resources that we have been sharing throughout the other institute dates. So that will be updated and shared. The link will be shared at the end. So we are. Is there any other panelists that would like to chime in, or if
Oh,
not?
I have a couple things if there's a minute.
Yeah, there's a minute. Go ahead.
So echoing everything that's already been said and adding certainly, supporting the great resources that CIVIX and Samara have produced to connect kids to the politicians. And I would say also, if you can, I know this is increasingly difficult, but like go to the government, right? Like go with your students and visit a legislature or your city hall, or, if you're in the Ottawa area, it's easy enough to get to Parliament for us. But get them to see where the decisions are made, or live stream it. I mean, you can watch on CPAC all the committee hearings, which is where I think you get some juicy deliberations happening, and some really interesting stuff happen, for sure. So, but and I also can recommend the programs at the Library of Parliament and Senate of Canada also have excellent programs for really humanizing the legislatures, and interviews with senators. You can invite them to your classroom. They have little videos about different parts of things. You can do an interactive immersive tour of Parliament now. So there's all kinds of really cool things. But we also, so we're working on a couple of new videos to go with our programs to humanize the people that work at Elections Canada, and to kind of talk about the safeguards, right? Because people are, there's the interference, commission happening right now, and so people, there's this concern, are our elections safe? So what we want to do is kind of show behind the scenes a little bit. What do we do behind the scenes? So those will be coming out later this year and kind of attached to our election simulation toolkit resource. And then, but we also, you have a great opportunity as Ontario teachers. You can invite an educator to your classroom to help you, who is a public servant. So Melissa Chan, who's here on the call and was our moderator last week, is our coordinator in Markham. So she can come to classrooms and talk about the work at what happens at Elections Canada. We also have a coordinator in the Northwestern Ontario, Ashley Nirmala, who's based out of Nipigon and Thunder Bay. So, so we have two opportunities for teachers to kind of invite us directly into your classroom and to assist you.
Perfect. Thank you so much for sharing. We are going to move on to now our debriefing strategy, which is another teaching strategy that you can kind of take some inspiration from for your own classrooms. I'm just going to share my screen. So this next activity is what we will be doing to kind of make conversation in our breakout room. So the strategy is called Sticky Note Storm, ou en français, Tempête des autocollants. And essentially, it is just a great way to kind of generate ideas and put them out in kind of more of a visual way for students to be able to share. And again, they don't necessarily have to write their name on anything. So it's kind of gives them more of like an anonymous way to share ideas. So students can work in small groups. You can either give them sticky notes or you can use applications like Padlet in order to do it kind of what we would be doing today through kind of like a digital platform as well. And it's actually a really good way to do this as well, because you can kind of keep track of a Padlet. As a teacher, you can see kind of what student has posted what, and you can use it kind of as like a diagnostic. So you would pose a question or you give a prompt, which you will see each breakout room has their own prompt. And you give kind of like a time limit for responses, and students will try to write down as many ideas as they can. And place them either at the center of the table if you're working with real sticky notes, or on the Padlet. So the goal here is to generate as many ideas as you can. And after each round, students and the teacher will go through and review kind of like everybody's contributions. Juste pour traduire, les élèves travaillent en très petits groupes et tu poses une question ou tu donnes une invitation aux élèves. Et tu leur donnes un temps de limite pour leur réponse. Les élèves inscrits autant de réponses qu'ils peuvent, soit avec des vrais autocollants ou sur le Padlet. Et ils vont essayer de générer autant d'idées que possible. Et à la fin, tu fais comme un peu une révision ou un partage des idées entre les élèves et l'enseignant. Et là, ça pourrait peut-être générer d'autres questions. So c'est ça, on aimerait remercier tout le monde. Je vais, si Sandy n'a pas fait pour tout le monde encore, I'm going to share the link to the Padlet, and I'm going to add all of the things, all of the sources that were discussed today by the panelists, as well as things that the panelists sent me through email in terms of like access to their websites from their various organizations. So I'm not sure, I can't see the chat if that's in there or not.
I just added the feedback form in the Padlet.
Thank you.
Yeah, no
Thank
problem.
you very much. And I think it's sorry.
I
Yeah.
was just reminding everybody. So yes, the feedback form, we have one more session. Your feedback is super appreciated. We improve things, we tweak things. So any good suggestion, constructive comments. On apprécie que vous preniez 2-3 minutes pour remplir le formulaire. Ça nous aide à donner un meilleur produit à chaque fois. Alors, oui, on vous remercie beaucoup d'avoir été là encore une fois. Et il nous reste une rencontre le 2 avril pour les conversations provocantes sur l'actualité dans le milieu scolaire. Alors, toujours à la même heure. Et c'est tout pour moi.
Oui.
On remercie nos panélistes, évidemment. Thank you to all the guests who were here tonight with us and truly helped us have a better understanding on how to have those tricky conversations in our classroom when we talk about politics.